So this whole idea of artificial intelligence, that the craft we now know from experiences is alive. You can touch it and it's alive. And it's a biological system, and it can think and stuff like that. And I sort of found it by accident, these people coming to me, but I discovered that it appears that the government may have some insight on this, because there's an experiment it was done in 2004 at the University of Southern Florida, and it was done with a rat brain. I don't know if you've ever seen this video. So what they do is they take a rat brain, and they take 20,000 neurons out of the rat brain, and they put it in this little petri dish. And this is all on film. This is 2004. This is white world technology. This isn't DARPA. This is white world technology. So he puts it in a little disc, puts the little electrodes on the bottom, and they wire this thing into an F-22 fighter simulator. And then they train this thing. They send in a high signal, and the thing will the neurons will send a negative signal back, and they train this thing. You know, the plane is going like this to keep it stable, then up and down the nose and stuff like that. And they work on this thing, and they basically learns how to do this. So it's flying this F-22 simulator, these 20,000 neurons of a rat brain, and then they change the wind, and they got, you know, crosswinds and all this kind of stuff, and thunderstorms and stuff, and they're still flying the thing. And that's like 2004. White world technology that they've done. So you can imagine if they're doing that, what they've got with the black world. Because you even see, because filmmakers, I talk about the importance of filmmakers, that they drop this stuff into documentaries. So if you go back and you look at the movie Firefox by Clint Eastwood, this is what, 1990, somewhere in that period of time, and he steals the Russian jet fighter, and he's using his mind to fly the jet fighter, and you start to go like, do they have this? I mean, they're definitely working on it. There's no way they wouldn't. And so it's the whole idea that you can train DNA. You can't. It's, you know, a mechanical system computer. You're never going to get it that complex that you can do all this kind of stuff. But if you put a biological system in it, and you use what one guy, Steve Mira, who's a big guy out of England, said that he was working on bioboards 20 years ago. That they've learned this thing that you can train DNA. So you see this experiment with these rat neurons, and you go like, you don't think this will work? And it sort of backs up this fact that you can actually get a biological system that can actually fly the craft, and you don't need the person, and you can train this thing how to fly the craft. And that's 2004. That's 20 years ago.
So what if the beings are using us as the artificial intelligence for their crafts?
Yeah, well, they link it, so they're linked as well. A lot of people will say the alien is linked to the craft.
Yeah.
And some people even name the craft when they describe being on the craft. They'll have a name for what the craft is. And the one woman out of Florida was Kathy Martin's assistant. She talked about this thing where she was in the craft, and they took her down below, and they showed her like the engine or the system or whatever like that. And she said, it was like biological. She said it was alive, and she said there was like this fluid going through the floor. Now I don't know if they're just making this stuff up to give you images that this really wasn't happening. It's like a lucid dream type thing. But she said there was like fluid, looks like blood going through the floor. This fluid going, and she was talking to this engine, and the craft was in contact with all the other crafts in the solar system. They were moving around, and they were communicating. And then she said to it, she said, "Oh, how can you do this? This is terrible." And he said, "That's my job. Don't worry about me." And she's talking to this engine. So you look at this stuff, and then you start to wonder, how far have they advanced? And we've only in the last maybe 10 years in ufology discovered this consciousness link that to the craft, and the fact that it may be a biological system. And you even get Jim Semivan has confirmed that, this fact that people are flying the craft. And he was talking to Whitley Strieber about it. And I know when I got it, I had the 36, and then I would start to ask people, because when you ask the first question, you can't go back and ask the question again, because then the story's out, and it doesn't mean anything. So I was talking to Whitley, and then he said, "Well, I may have something for you." And then he said he thinks he flew the craft, and this is Whitley Strieber, and then he was talking about the fact about this other thing that I discovered later on, because you always discover these things piece by piece. And the thing I discovered was this idea where Jim Semivan said there was somebody standing behind him, and it had this guardian type thing going on about it. And I remember this a guy who was a former U.S. Air Force retired colonel, I lectured in Orange County, and I was talking about flying the craft, and then we went after you go to the restaurant or whatever, and we were in the restaurant, and then this guy comes in and said, David, should have been at Grant's lecture. He's talking about flying the craft. And the guy said, yeah, really? And then they said, David, tell him what you do. And I said, well, what are you? He said, I'm a pilot. I said, oh, yeah, you're a pilot. My father was a pilot. My son's a pilot. And I said, what do you fly? And he said, well, I flew all these different things. Then he said, F-16. I said, you flew F-16s? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, I'm a retired U.S. Air Force colonel. Flew in Iraq. And I went, what, really? I said, tell me your story. You flew the craft? And he said, well, it seemed like a dream. I said, well, everybody thinks it seems like a dream. I said, well, sit down and tell me the story. And he said, well, no. And then finally he sat down and he told me the story. So he told me the same thing. He said he was on the craft. He just suddenly was on the craft. And he's standing on the craft. And he said, there's somebody behind him. And he said he didn't know whether it was humans or whether it was aliens. And he's standing there. And then they said, okay, go ahead. And he said, I don't know what to do. And they said, you know what to do. Just do it. And then so he goes and he sees this panel, and then he puts his hands on the panel, and suddenly he's flying the craft. And he said it was just like an F-16. He talked about suction cups. I don't know what that means. He said it was had suction cups like an F-16. And he's holding his hands on this thing, and then he's going, this is weird. And then he takes his hand off, and he's waiting for it to stall. He takes his hand off, and nothing happens. And then he takes his other hand off, but he leaves it about this far off so he can put it back down when it stalls. And he's got his hands off the panel, and he says this thing is flying. So he's talking about this intelligence behind him. So I started asking people about was there anybody behind you that was telling you things and you couldn't look around? So I said to Whitley, Whitley, I got this weird story. People are telling me this story when you're on the craft and somebody behind you and you can't see who they are and you're not allowed to look around and they're telling you what to do or whatever. Has that ever happened to you? And he goes, all the time. And then he said, when I had the craft, I was sitting at the panel board, and I think I'm not sure, but I think I was flying the craft. I think I was gonna fly the craft. And he said he was sitting there holding his hands there, and then he said, boy, I'd love to steal this thing. And then he says somebody behind him telepathically started laughing. So you get this whole thing, and so this thing with the craft, it's sort of like, if I'd known the questions to ask before, I would have been able to nail it down. So what you get is this free survey where they do 4,200 people. They had 675 questions. And the way they got the questions is they went to the experiences and they got all these weird stories about, like 14% of all people that they answered the questions said they'd flown the craft. And so you get these things, and then they'd ask these questions of all the people. But whereas I went in with one or two questions, and then I'd go all through all the people, and then I'd go back. I couldn't go back and re-ask the questions because your data would be contaminated. And I got really weird things that you would see, where this idea that the craft is bigger on the inside than it is outside. Now that's becoming popular, but that was new when I got it. And I even had the first woman that told me that she'd flown the craft. And I remember when she told me, she was like mid-70s or whatever. And I thought to myself, like, she's telling, I channel, and I was abducted, and I was standing in a diaper in the middle of the field, and the UFO was there and stuff. She's telling all this stuff. I said, whatever, I've heard all that stuff before. And then she's going on, and then she says, and I was flying the craft. And I'm thinking, what? It's like, that's enough. Okay, come on, you're getting crazy here. And I didn't say that to her, but I'm thinking to myself, like, come on, you're 75 years old. Come on, you flew the craft, and the first thing I thought was like, Saudi Arabian women, you can't drive a car without the man in the car. I mean, how could you? They allow with no insurance, nothing, just, hey, fly the craft. And I thought it made so stupid. So when she told me that, and then she added a new thing that I thought was even crazier. She said they can make the craft as big as they want. It's all mind stuff. And she said they've got crafts that are as big as the solar system. And I'm just thinking to myself, yeah, sure they do. And now you hear these stories like Terry Lovelace and Chris Bledsoe, the thing's 30 feet on the outside. And I remember Chris Bledsoe saying, I said, did that happen to you? And he said, yeah. And he said, I looked in the craft, and it was huge inside the craft. And you look back outside the craft, and it was like 30 feet across. He looked inside the craft. And apparently they say even on the ground, they had one on the ground that was in California. And it was bigger on the inside than it was outside. And that would indicate some of the stuff where you can't go public with that. I mean, if you can develop that kind of technology, so you have that, and yet you'd go back, and it was this synchronistic thing where I was just listening to some people this morning talking, and they're talking about this thing that you get guided, and they were both confirming. One was the top remote viewer guys, and the other was Jeffrey Mishlove, and they both said, I think I got guided. That these things all didn't happen by accident, and
guided like through their life.
Through synchronicities and your higher self, or somebody's guiding you through this, and that's what Chris sort of gave me this idea that he had sort of been guided. But these are the things you pick up as you go along. And I wish I'd known all this before I started down this road, because the free survey said of the people who answered the question, it was 14% claimed they'd flown the craft. And so that's the thing, is you get these things that don't make any sense. Like, why would they allow you to fly the craft? And even in the end, I don't think they're allowing you to fly the craft. I think it's some dream thing where they're giving you an image and stuff. Because Ron Johnson, who's one of the top experiences I've run into, where he said they allowed him to fly the craft, and I said, well, why are they allowing you to fly the craft? And he said, well, they said, that's my job. That's why I'm here. It's my job is to get people off the planet. You know, this idea about the end of the world type scenario where they'll ask somebody, what are you doing? Oh, I've been taught to guide people. Well, when? I don't know. They say when the time is right, you'll know what to do. And this idea that some catastrophic thing is going to happen, and these people are going to say, calm down, go this way, and they've been trained to do this kind of stuff. And Chris had this same sort of statement that he had this thing that he would have to, or Ron Johnson, he'd have to do this thing, and yet he had this real bad heart condition. He was like, any time he could die. He has 14% of his heart left or something like that. And then he would tell the story where they flew the craft, and he wanted to see the Milky Way from a distance, and they told him it's within you, it's in your mind, and when you can go there, we'll go. And then suddenly he's looking at the Milky Way, and yet that was the only time he actually seemed to fly the craft. And I think of all the people I've talked to, I don't think anybody I've ever talked to said they flew it more than once. This Pam Dupuis, the first woman, and she said that they started with headbands, and you'll read there's the occasional thing about Roswell that they found the headbands on these and it's almost like they're taking you through a thing. They teach you to do it with the headband, and then smaller headbands, and then there's no headbands and stuff like that, and it's almost like they're sort of unraveling this thing, because people say, well, they got different models, and I said, that doesn't make sense. Come on, if you're that advanced, we have this idea like, you have a GM car, and this next year it's different and different and different, and that's what people say. They're doing these things. I'm going, no, I think a lot of this stuff is staged. It's just to teach you something. It's not. You're not really doing what you think you're doing. They're just using this as an example to teach you the power of your mind, telepathy, all this kind of stuff. Because what you'll get is you'll get a lot of stories of experiencers. In fact, this Pam Dupuis, and there was one of the people who ran the big Phoenix, Arizona site, because she lived in Phoenix, and they both had the same dream. And this was this sort of idea where they'd be sitting there as kids, and they'd be sitting there cross-legged, and they would be in a row of all these kids around, and there would be a being there, but they couldn't see anything above the waist, and they were being taught to levitate these balls. And there was 3 different color balls. One was very easy to levitate, one was not so medium, one was very hard to levitate, and they would levitate this ball back and forth, and they both had the same story. And then you start hearing, you go across, and then you hear these other people trained as kids. They were on the ship, and they're doing all this kind of training. So we're being put through something where I think it's more the mind thing. They're teaching us the power of the mind, the manifestation, all this kind of stuff. And all this stuff, I think, is just a play that they're sort of composing for people, because it doesn't make any sense that they would, because people always say, like, why would they let you fly the craft? And it doesn't make any sense that they would do that. It has to be something below that, where they want that idea across that you can move from here and to the other side of the galaxy, which is what people say. You can go from here to the other side of the universe instantaneously. It's in your mind, and that goes to the crossover of near-death experience and out-of-body experience. Is an out-of-body experience, the top guy, I can't remember his name is, said you have to go within to go without. That you're not really going anywhere, you're going within yourself. Same as remote viewing. I always tell people, remote viewing, you're not going anywhere. It's not like the remote viewer, you say, okay, here's your target, and then they say, hang on, I'm flying there, I'll be there in a minute. It's like they're instantly at the target. Everything is, and that's this whole concept. Everything may be here now. There's no time, there's no space, it's all here and now. And it's the ability to go within yourself to access, it's all within you. So like a remote viewer is just going in with himself, and the whole concept is everything is here, so everything's in your head. The whole universe is in your head. Same idea as when you have an out-of-body experience, you're above your body, you look back and you say, is the consciousness in the brain? And you look and say, no, the consciousness is floating in the room. So therefore, the brain is in the consciousness, not the other way around. People have it reversed. And then the consciousness can float to the window and look out the window and see all the stars and planets and stuff. That is in your consciousness as well. And that flips the whole idea about, what comes first, the chicken or the egg. And we've got it totally backwards. And I think maybe that's what they're trying to show us, is the fact through example, because they're not going to do it the way we do it, not with a lecture. They're going to do it through these little symbols, little stories, and eventually people like me put all the stories together, and then we try to analyze it, and we start to see patterns in the story, and that's the way they get the message out.